Hello and welcome. My name is Leah Kopke, and this is my 3D modeling podcast, Ambient 3D Animations. In today's episode, we're going to go ahead and 3D model a bookshelf, so that will be a lot of fun. This is a continuation of the last episodes where we 3D modeled a hand to use as a sculpture and a bookend for a library. So let's go ahead and jump into Cinema 4D and get started. Here we are inside of Cinema 4D. Some things I'd like to double check right off the bat is that we are using the right settings for our units. I'm going to be working in inches today. You can work in any number of units you see fit. If I hit Control D or Command D on a Mac, Control D for Windows, it will open up our project manager settings. Under scale, I can change this from centimeters to inches. We need to also go into Edit, Preferences, and double check our units in here. Clicking here, this says inches, that's good to go. Now let's go ahead and get started with creating our uprights for the bookshelf. I'll drop a cube into our scene and I will make it 2 inches by 8 feet tall, and then I will make it 4 inches so that this is a 2 by 4. It's a standard size, so it would be easier to create in real life. Now that we've done that, you'll notice that this is not on the floor on our work plane. The center axis is there, so we need this to be 96 inches divided by 2 up higher in the Y direction, because this works like a calculator. Cinema 4D is like a calculator. You can also type in addition, subtraction, division signs in here, and it will calculate it for you as soon as you hit enter, which is pretty cool. So there we go. We have our upright here. It is the appropriate size. We could get this from Menards. It works. Okay, so let's go ahead and rename this cube upright. And now we're going to need some other supports going the other way. And we're going to connect them using a lap joint. If you aren't familiar with all the wood joints here, there's some good examples of lap joints and what they look like. This is a cross lap joint. This is a half lap joint. It's interesting to see the different ways you can go about this. Now, before we go down the woodworking rabbit hole here, let's just go back in here and drop another cube into our scene. This is going to be another 2 by 4. And I'm going to go into this view. I'm using the middle mouse button to switch in and out of these views, by the way. So this I would like to be about 2 feet. So 2 feet would mean in the Y direction, or rather in the Z direction, that would be 24 inches. 24 inches. And then we're going to need this to be 4 inches this direction and 2 inches this direction, so that we have another 2 by 4. Now we are going to need to move this on over in the Z direction about 12 inches. Since the center of this is 2 inches up, but we want this to be up off the ground so that if someone were to vacuum, they could do so under the bookshelf. I'm going to adjust this to be 8 inches up in the Y direction. So that'll leave us about 6 inches of clearance here to clean. I like to consider if this was also in real life, it just adds a certain level of realism. And I also got a degree in industrial design, so it's hard for me to not think in terms of if we were actually to manufacture this. I need this to move over actually less than 12 inches. I know I said 12, but now I'm looking at this and this doesn't line up because I wasn't considering that I want this to overlap the upright a little bit, because once again, we're creating that lap joint. So now we have this, and this will be our side lap joint. 2x4. So we have both of these. I'm going to go ahead and turn on my lines here. In order for these to overlap and be correct, we're going to need to make these editable so that we can add those cutouts as needed. So I'll go ahead and use the C hotkey in order to make these editable, and now we can go into edge mode and add in loops. We've covered the loop path cut. The hotkey for that is ML. You can also find many of these tools in the mesh menu. Under cut, you can find your loop cut right over here. We've covered this tool in the past. You can check out that episode if you're interested. I'm going to just arbitrarily drop a loop in here because then I can go ahead and adjust it in here. I'll change this to be 90 inches so that it's, if this is a 96-inch upright and this 2x4 is 6 inches off the ground, that means that this is 90 inches from that top end up here. So that's a little bit of math, but that's okay. I'm going to drop this in here. That'll be 4 inches away from the other cut. And now I'm going to add in a cut in here. This will be 4 inches away from that end. Now that we have all of that in place, I also need one on the opposite side. We need a nice round number. So that's 4 inches from this end. But right now it says 16 because it's doing the math from this last edge here. So it's 16 inches away from this cut. 16 plus 4 is 20, so then it's 20 away from here, and then there'd be 4 more to this side. So it's a little bit of math we're doing, but not too much. And you can, of course, use a calculator. Now we're going to need some cuts going down the center, so ML. This time I'm going to hold down Shift so that we can utilize Quantize. And we'll just make a cut down the middle using Quantize. Shift activates Quantize. We've covered that in the past. The Quantize tool settings are right in here. You can check out the episode on that if you want to learn. Now for this upright, we're going to need to make some cuts. So I'm going to hide the other 2x4. And what I'll do next is I'm just going to delete these because we're going to need a cut here. And then we're going to close it again using the bridge tool. The hotkey for the bridge tool is MB. We've covered this in the past. I realized I missed one of these sides here. Okay, now we'll use the hotkey MB. I'm going to use it in edge mode. I'll click on one edge, hold Shift, click on the other edge, drag it over so that they connect, and then I'll use Close Polygon Hole, another tool we have another episode on, and I'll click here and here. So you'll notice a pattern here that these tools that I'm using we've covered in past episodes in this podcast. So this is practicing what has already been covered. I'll still briefly go over them so that if you're new, you can still use the tools and find them. I just won't go into all their settings in this episode. You can learn about all their settings in the other episodes. Now we're going to need to cut this as well. We can turn on symmetry. We need to turn on the symmetry in the correct direction though. So I'll turn it on in the Z. I'll select these sides. And I'll delete them. And you can see it did the same on the opposite side, which is good. We're going to use MB again in edge mode in order to connect these. Drag it on over. We're using bridge. We'll close this hole here using close polygon hole. I'll close it on both sides. We have some good symmetry there. That is where the symmetry tool saves you some good time. I'll turn off symmetry. And I'll unhide the upright. Oh, you'll notice that I made a mistake. I remembered it being on the other side. But you know what? That's okay. Because what we can do is we can just rotate this around in the model mode. I'm holding down shift so that I rotate this 180 degrees. And there we go. It matches up. It's fine. Okay, so we have those two parts there. Now we need two uprights. And I don't want to bog down my machine with additional polygons. So we're going to use an instance. The way we use an instance is, and you'll see that there's actually two different types of instance. There's Mo instance, and that is designed to use with the cloner. We haven't covered the cloner yet, but just so that you know, in case if you are working with the cloner, but you can also just use the regular instance, which is this one in here. I'm going to drag and drop it up here just so that we have it available. They work very similar, just one is designed to be used with the MoGraph system and such, and for those animation capabilities. Right now I'm okay with just using the regular instance, so I'll click on this right here with the upright selected and I'll make a copy. If I hold down shift and move it over, it'll move that copy over. So that is our instance. Super helpful. And now we're also going to need an instance of this because it's a little bit weird for a bookshelf to only be supported on the bottom like this. It doesn't seem very stable. So we're going to need to fix that. So let's go ahead and make an instance of this 2x4 as well. And I'll hold down shift and I'll move this on up. Now, something you might be noticing is that I'm holding down shift and it's not lining up right, and this is moving in increments of 5. But what if I want it to move in increments of 1 inch? I can open up our modeling settings in here, go over to quantize, change this to be 1 inch, and now when we hold down shift and move this on up, we can get it to line up just right exact. And that's what I like to see. I'll hold down Control to create a copy of this and hold Shift at the same time so that I can now use Quantize with this as well. 18 inches feels good. So that's 18 inches down. I like the shape. This is the first side we've made for this bookshelf. Something that you may realize is that we need to create some more cuts. It's also sometimes easier for me to visualize these shapes if I change the color of them. So if you go into the basic, you can change the display color to a custom color. And we could make this blue if we wanted to. And now you can see a little bit easier what's what and how they're joining up. I can copy this color and I can add it to the other upright. That doesn't mean this is what we're going to be rendering it out as or anything like that. I am purely just changing this so that I can see what I'm doing a little bit easier. I'll make this some color over here, or you can paste it like that and have them be the exact same blue color. So now I can just see a little bit easier. I want the lap joints to be pretty much lined up about the same. So I will work on this upright. Now the cool thing about instances is that if you update the original, all the other instances automatically update. So if I change this one upright, it will change all other instances of that upright. and it'll save us time 3D modeling, which makes our lives easier, which is exactly what we want to do. We want to spend more time getting work done than wasting time. So ML is the hotkey for loop selection. We have our upright selected. We need to be in edge mode in order to use this tool appropriately because we are working with edges here. And I'll drop this in here. I use the hotkey ML again to pull up these settings. I adjusted that to be 82. That looks good. And now we're going to need one down here. This one I'm going to round up to be 14. If you place these pretty close, you can get an idea of what the dimension should be. So this looks like it's 63.6. So without even having to do any math, I can round that up and figure that that'll be about it. And I'll try 64. And that looks like it lines up right. Now I'm going to just go ahead and hide these so I can see what I'm doing, because what we need to do actually is delete these once again, delete these here, and then we need to use MB in edge mode to connect these. You know, actually let's connect these two. Drag it across, that looks good. And then we'll do this side, drag it across, that looks good. MD for closed polygon hole. This tool is super useful. I'm going to fill that in there. I'll fill this in here, fill this in here. And now that looks pretty good. You can see that automatically updated on our additional upright. These will glue together with some wood glue. You can put some clamps on it and it'll be good to go. Now, we're going to need 2 of these uprights. Or 2 of these sides rather, because this is just one side of the bookshelf. So in order to do that, I'm going to need to create a null. And I'm going to call this side. I'll drop all of these within that null. Now what I can do is hold down Control and it'll create a duplicate of that side. If I want this side to also update with this and this, I'll need as instances. I can delete those 2, but once you notice that I delete those, it breaks the instances and those turn red. So what I actually need to do is go into the Object tab of the instance. And I'm going to drag the original upright in here. I'm going to then make sure that it has this side lap joint and not the other one. And this one has the correct side lap joint. So what I'm doing is I'm swapping out this as the instance reference to this one, the original one I made. Because I think that'll work a lot better for this. I think that will work a lot better for this instance. I'm sorry, that was a really, really bad joke. I couldn't not say it, okay? So we have this set up here. Now, if I delete these, you can see everything's green and good, nothing's turning red. And I can just make a duplicate of this upright, hold down Shift. That looks good. And we'll do the same thing for here. Hold down Shift. That looks good. Let's go ahead and rotate this around 180 degrees. And then I'll move this back into place, holding down Shift. It's really hard for me to see if I'm moving this at the appropriate amount, so I'm going into the top view using the middle mouse button, holding down Shift again. It's really nice that we can see these grid lines here and see if everything's matching up. This looks excellent. Now, something I forgot to do was I actually want this to be about 4 feet that way, this direction. So let me center this and then type in 4 feet. Now, the cool thing about this is even though we're working in inches, if I type in 4 feet, hit enter, it will automatically update that amount to be in inches, even if I type in feet. So this looks good. Remember to save your project. I'll go ahead and do that now. We're going to need some shelves. I think that'll work. I'll add in another cube here. In the object tab, we'll put in .48 inches or 4 feet. And then we'll make this 0.5 high. And we'll make it 2 feet deep. We'll name this shelf. Here we go. In the top view, I'm going to hold down Shift and line this up. I didn't account for the thickness of this side when I moved it over 4 feet, so I actually need to move this over 2 more inches or just make the shelf itself a little bit more narrow, which I might do just because I'd like the overall size to be pretty standard. So this shelf actually needs to be 46 inches. So this shelf is going to need some brackets. But just to start off with, I'm going to move it up a little bit. .25, so that it lines up with that lap joint. And this is going to need an L bracket. I'm going to drop in a plane in here and adjust its size to 1 by 1, just so that I can see where it is and where it's starting and move it over. Let's actually make it 3 by 3 and change the segments to 1 by 1. I like to just make things smaller so that I can see where they are, and then I can move them over and think about really what relative size is fitting for this. This plane needs to change directions, so I'll make this in the positive X direction. I'll move this over, holding down Shift. It's not lining up exactly. I think this needs to, let's Let's take a look at where this is in space. "47" is correct. You can see that these are both on the same plane. I'm going to make this editable using the C hotkey. Hold this edge here. I'm going to need to extrude it with MT. I'd like to extrude this. I'm just going to hide everything else so that I can see what I'm doing. MT is the hotkey for extrude. You can see this is going the wrong way, so I'll change it by moving my mouse. I want this to go 3 inches. Need to change this. There we go. So this is the beginning of our L bracket. And that looks good. It's going to need some holes in it. I might actually hold off for a bit until I find the hardware. We'll figure out the size of the hole later. We can update it later and use instances so that it's easy. So now this is going to be named L bracket. I'll bring back the shelf so that we can see it. And we've covered the thicken tool in the past. It'll be great for this. I'll adjust the thickness to be something much less for right now, just so that it looks okay while we're thinking. And what I like to do is look up rolled steel dimensions. Maybe I'll try 18 gauge 0.048 or 0.5. 0.05. I'll change the position to be -100% so that it's going that way. I'm going to bring back the sides here. And I'll make some more instances. But you'll notice that the axis isn't in the center, so that's a little bit annoying. So what I want to do is use the L hotkey or click on this right here so that I can move the axis over. I delete the old instance. I'm going to create another instance. And my hope is now the axes will just be nicely lined up. That looks like it's pretty well centered. Then I will need to create a copy of this, holding down Control. Just move this over here. Rotate it around 180 degrees. I held down Shift in order to use quantize to get that pretty exact. that's lined up. We'll need another copy for the other side. Holding down Shift to snap that there. It's 20 inches away from the other one. I'll worry about adding in the holes once I find the hardware, so I'm not going to think too much about that right now. I'm going to use the naming tool in order to change all of these called thicken instance to L bracket thicken. So I put in replace thicken with L bracket thicken, replace name, and you can see those automatically updated. I just noticed that I had misspelled this so that, or had a typo, so that looks better. I'll name the shelf assembly. I'll place these in here. So maybe what I'll do is I'll actually use a cloner and I'll clone the shelf assembly, and it'll help me figure out how many of these I want. I'll have this clone linear, and then I'll increase the count and decrease the distance. If you hold down Alt, you can adjust this in smaller increments. Something like that. This top shelf, actually, I'm not going to have be there. I'm going to make a copy of the shelf assembly because we actually have a top section we need to add to this shelf. This top section, I'm going to name that. I'll name this cloner shelves. I'll move this on up, holding down Shift. I'll do minus 0.5 so that this is right about. You know what? Actually, I like where it's placed. I'm going to hit undo and just rotate this around, and then I'll line it up. Because if you remember the sketch we did, this is going to need to attach a little bit differently. And be up a little bit higher. I want to find the original upright. I'm going to copy it, click outside that group, and then paste. Now I have a secondary upright, and for this one, I'd like this one to be a little bit shorter. I'll need to make some adjustments to it. I'm going to use UL in order to select loop. So loop selection is UL. You can see this is the tool here that we're using. So we've selected along this loop all the way around because we modeled with nice neat loops. And now I'll use UF for fill selection. I'll hold down Shift and I'll click right here. And now I can just delete all that because I don't think that I need it. And with that done, you can see that we have a hole. So we're going to need to fill this with the hotkey MD, which opens up our close polygon hole tool. And we'll just click in there so that it's nice and neat. You'll notice that the center of the upright is still in the same location as before, so I'm going to need to move that using the L hotkey, and I'll hold down Shift, so we're just moving the axis. That's the Enable Axis tool, L hotkey. And then once we're done, remember to hit the L hotkey again so that we close out of that, and that'll allow us to move the model again. I'm lining that up 96 inches for the top. I can create a copy, drag that over, maybe even better than a copy. I'll hit undo, name this top, and we'll just make another one of these instances because it's just a duplicate. A lot of manufactured objects have as few parts as possible when thinking of how to build something. Just because it reduces the cost of manufacturing to make a bunch of duplicates rather than a bunch of individual different unique parts. Not that this is ever going to be manufactured. I'm never really going to make this. This is solely for the purpose of rendering. But I like to 3D model things, even when they're just being used for rendering, thinking of if they were to be made in real life. I'm going to copy this and paste it so that we have another one of these. And the reason why I like to do that is when you take into consideration actual constraints in terms of manufacturing or construction, there's a certain amount of realism added to it. Now, there are times to break that rule of making something that realistic. And a time to do that is when you're creating something maybe a little bit more whimsical. But I think the whimsical things are a little bit more realistic when parts of it feel like they're based in reality. Like this is something that we could actually make and have here. And then if you change something and make it a little bit more whimsical, another part of it, then it becomes more realistic and more believable. Like think of Harry Potter. For the top, just going to add in this. I need to do that under the Object tab. 48 inches in the X. And then we need this to be, let's make it 1 inch. Let's make this nice. And the Y, and the Z, 48, or 28, 24, 2 feet, 24. Okay, and now hit the middle mouse button, so that we can hold down this button here and just line it up. Actually, I want to move in these sides. want to move in this side 2 inches. That's 2 inches. And then for the shelf assembly, I want to change the shelf to be 44 inches. Then I can move this over an inch, and you'll see all the other shelves update, which is the nice thing about this. And then I can move these over 2 inches. You can see that updates. So that's the nice thing about these instances. If you change your mind about dimensions, it's really easy to adjust. Because everything automatically updates. I'll move this up, 0.5 more. Shelving top. I don't even need to adjust that further to make that look right. Now the cool thing about this is that if you look at it from this side, it doesn't look like 2 pieces. But it actually is. I'm going to group these. And add this in here. If I want to make this feel even more like it'll fall over, which I think is part of the appeal of this, is I could leave this like partially like that. If I open up what we had 3D modeled the last few episodes, it'll take a moment to load. We can place our statue where it needs to go. So this is the hand sculpture. I'm just gonna copy this and paste it in here. I'm going to move this over here. Just for right now, I'm going to turn off the subdivision surface so that this runs a little bit quicker. I'm rotating this some. I know this is way too small at this moment, but we can scale it up. I'm going to hit save. I'm going to make sure that I scale this up in object mode. Use the T hotkey. Just so that I can see where the floor is in this instance, I'm going to drop in a plane and scale it up. it's a little bit of back and forth work with designing the bookshelf and then bringing the sculpture element back in here. If you want to learn about 3D modeling the hand, I covered this in the previous episodes. Or if you just want to make a bookshelf today, you don't really need to add this in. I think adding in this hand sculpture does add that little bit of fantasy. I think a lot of sculptures, what's cool about them being in environments is that they break your usual perspective of the world by just throwing in the unexpected. They make you think about things a little bit differently with those changes. We can even rotate the wrist a little bit. So that's the cool thing about leaving this in its original rigging state before we change our mind about anything is that it makes this adjustable. I'll move this up a little bit. So I want to add in some more brackets in here just so that this looks a little bit more stable if it were actually to be made more realistic. A lot of times shelves will have a cross bracket in the back just to stabilize it more. I have an idea. I'm going to drop in a cube here. I'm going to make it 0.5 inches, and I'm just going to try this out to see what it looks like. Oh, I need to change this in here. 0.5. Let's make this 6 feet. 0.05. Something like that, and then these could have holes for hardware to go inside of them to hold them in place. And if you were at a lower level and were looking up at this one up here, if we put a small bracket back here, it would actually be very hard to see, but it may help stabilize it a little bit more. Or even if I have some ideas. I just realized something. I have an idea. I'm going to move this over an inch. Now that I've moved that over an inch, actually need to reduce the size here, 44 inches. I'll use ML and make this editable so that I can .5 is fine. I'm going to click on this polygon here, use this, I'm gonna copy it, and then I'm going to paste it so that we just have this polygon here that's the correct dimensions. And then I'll use MT to extrude this up 3 inches. And then I'll use MT So what I'm actually thinking right now is maybe I'm going to adjust this upright. What this means is that these 4 uprights won't exactly be the same. I'm thinking about how I can make this shelf a little bit more secure without changing too much. So I just made this upright over here editable. This one I will have reference the editable one. I'm going to name this one front. I'll name this one front. So that now I can change this and add in a loop here without changing those other 2. I'll make this 0.5 inches away. You can see that's also updating on the other side because that's referencing this one. This is about 0.5 inches, if I remember correctly. So we'll find out once I add in a loop here, 0.5 inches away, if this lines up. I'm hoping it does. They look right. Yeah, that looks right. Alrighty, so now that I've done that, I am actually going to cut this. Cut this away. Cut this away. And I'm going to solo this just so that I'm only working on this one. It's easier to see what I'm doing. In edge mode, I'll select this edge. I'm using the right bracket to make my selection a little bit larger. Select both of those, MB for bridge. Drag this across, use MD to close, to close. That looks good. And now what I can do is I can select this, the shelf that we need to rename, and I can use MT. Oh, I should turn on symmetry so I don't have to do this again. Let's take a look at our symmetry settings. I'll use X. I'm going to solo this again, just so I can see what I'm working with. Looks like we have both sides selected. MT. I need this to move over 4 inches. I'm going to hit apply and unhide. Oh, that was actually way too much. Let's change this to B2. So the interesting thing here is that although this is a duplicate, it actually, this upright you can see actually needed to be mirrored a different way. I'm just going to delete it. And then I definitely need another one. But this one's editable so that I can change it. I'm going to solo it. And turn off this. I'm just working on here. I need to rotate this 90 degrees. And I need this to go up, I believe, 4 inches. There we go. And now I need to select this edge. It's kind of like doing a puzzle, 3D modeling, and it's a lot of fun. It uses your brain. It's a good brain workout for you. Actually, maybe I'll connect these two. MB. Bridge those across. MB. MD to fill in here. And to fill in here. Because this is the side we actually need to remove. MB for bridge. I'll select this edge, connect them, select this edge. We can connect them or we can use MD to just fill it in. Okay. So now this is correct. Now we might as well name these left and right so that we don't get confused later. This one is our left. So I'll just type in L for there so we know what it is. This is our right. My thought process with this is that this won't be as visible when you're looking up at it, not easily anyways, and it'll help stabilize the whole thing. Because I want this to almost look like it was sliced. But it needs something stabilizing it in the back for sure. Especially since there isn't anything here. So I think that would help. I think that I'll also add in a couple of screws under here to connect these together. This will be glued since it's a lap joint. But then the shelf will connect through here. If we connect the shelf through here, we may no longer need this bracket, honestly. In the back, we might just need it in the front. I'm to a certain degree designing this as I go and thinking of what I'm doing. Sometimes 3D modeling helps you problem solve and think of how you would actually build something. So on the back side of the shelf, I'm thinking, first I need to select this. And I'm thinking I'm just going to copy and paste this just so that I have a polygon here. And once I've done that, I can go ahead and scale this in a bit. I could put this here. And I can use ML to create a cut here and a cut here. And with that done, I can grab this edge and use MT to scale it. I can use MT in order to extrude it. And the cool thing about this is that now we have this bracket here, and I can use the thicken on it. And then we could just add in some holes for screws. This doesn't even need to be this large, but we could add in some holes for screws, and this will connect to the shelf. I'm going to adjust this position to 100% for the thicken so that it's going outwards instead of inwards. You can see that as I move this, it adjusts where that thickness is being added. So this would be sheet metal. I name that T-shaped bracket, and I'll call this thicken. This will be just T-shaped bracket, so that now we have everything organized. And I think that'll just make it stronger. And you won't see that from the front, so it'll look like it's just balancing, and you won't see that it has that bracket back there helping to support it. So I think that's pretty cool. One of my favorite websites in order to find 3D models for hardware is McMasterCar. It's a great website, and you can find all kinds of fasteners here and 3D models for them. It's excellent, and you can even buy these. A lot of engineers use this. So we're going to need screws today. We're going to need wood screws. You can see how nicely organized all of this is. You can even start narrowing down the options here. You have system of measurement, size, length. I know that I want a Phillips head. And right now I'm picking out screws for the brackets here. So I'm thinking of one that's longer, going through here, perhaps something like 1 inch or 1.5 inches. And then for here, we'd need something less than 1/2 inch, since these plywood shelves are about 1/2 inch. So let's look at what we have here. Let's look for 1.5 inches, because we have the clearance for that here. And the really cool thing about this is once you find a screw that you like, you can click on here and see what file types it comes in, and you can download a step file. I'm just going to scroll down to see what options we have here. So this one is a flathead, and I think that something else will work better potentially. Since this is going through wood, but it's also going through that metal bracket, I want to find something more so this shape. And you can pick the shapes here as well to narrow it down. So this one is steel rounded head screws for plywood and oriented strand board. And I think if it works for plywood, it would work for a lot of different kinds of woods as well. I'm going to go with this one because it has that rounded head shape, and I think it'll work really well for this situation. I think a number 8 will work fine. So I'll click on this and I'll hit download. And now we're going to need one that's a little bit shorter. So I'm going to adjust the size we need in here. Just so that I can find all the information here later, I'm actually going to just drag and drop this in here because you can see that there's a lot of helpful information in here. For the screw, because it shows you the drill bit size needed and other information that will be helpful for 3D modeling and creating those holes for later, if you'd like to add those to the wood. I'm going to clear the filter and look through here again. I know I want wood screws. I want them to be less than 1/2 inch, so let's look for 3/8. I know I want a Phillips head so that we don't have to have more than one bit. This one says it works for particle board and fiber board. I think it'll be fine for plywood in this case as well. I'm going to download this one right here, the number 7, 3/8 inch in length, as a step file. I'll go ahead and hit download, and there we go. That looks good. I'd like a 1-inch flathead screw to hold this together underneath. So that's what I'm looking for right now. So let's see what we can find here. This looks like it would work. I'll go ahead and download this. Let's look here and see if I'm missing any others. We can reuse some of the screws for the cross brackets in the back, so I think that'll work out fine. I'll drag and drop my screws into my scene and they'll just automatically load. I'll hit OK with the default settings. So this looks like it's our 1.5 inch screw. This is our 3/8 inch. And this is our 1 inch. If you ever want to look up the specs for any of these screws, you can copy and paste their part number listed here inside of McMaster-Carr, and it'll pull up the screw and you can easily find it again and read all about it. So let's go ahead and start off with this one because it'll be pretty quick to take care of this one here. I'm going to copy it and I'm going to paste it in here. Now the place where we want this screw to go is right over here. I'm hitting the middle mouse button to look at this from the top view. I can turn on the snap in here, and I can choose to snap to the work plane. And then that way we can have it line up pretty exact. I'm going to rotate this around 90 degrees. I'm holding down Shift to utilize quantize again. I want to move this 0.5 inches, so I'm going to change or make sure my Quantize is set to 0.5. And I'll hold down Control and Shift in order to make a copy about an inch away. Once I do that, I can hold down Control to make another copy, holding down Shift, and place them on the opposite side. I'm going to group all of these, and I'm just going to copy this name here. And I'll name the null that, so that's nice and neat and organized. This is a good start. I'm going to go over here and I'm going to work on the bracket. Now, since this bracket is an instance, if we update the original one, we'll automatically update all the others. I'm going to use the S hotkey to find it. It looks like it's right over here. I'm going to turn off that, and I'm just going to solo this for a moment by hitting this button up here. Now what I want to do is add in a couple of holes in here. So I'm going to use ML in order to add in some loops in edge mode. I want to add a loop in the center, one here, and one here. I'm holding Shift so that I can snap. I'll add one here, add one here. I'll select these surrounding points, use T in order to scale them in. I'm clicking and dragging out in space so that we do a general scale. And then I'll use Fit to Circle. Since we aren't going to manufacture this, we can kind of just eyeball this. It doesn't need to be exact. And I think it'd actually be helpful for me to drop the screw in here just so that I can see how it's looking. So I need this one here. I'm going to copy it, going to paste it in here. It didn't seem to copy over the name, so I'm just going to copy that, paste that name. I want to find where this is. So it's all the way over here. I need to move it into place. So the idea here is we'd want this hole, which I'm going to go ahead and select. We'd want this hole here to be larger than this. And larger than the threads, but not so big that the head of the screw goes through. So let's click on our fit circle again because we can adjust the size in here. Let's try 0.1 and see what that looks like. So what we need to do at this point is I need to select this area in here and delete it so that we have a hole. Now, this doesn't need to be super high poly because when you see this from far away, this is good enough. I'm going to go ahead and select these points around here. We're going to make a hole up here as well. Now, although we have different screws going in the side and up through the shelf, I think we can use the same size hole for both of them. So I'm going to use Fit Circle, and this time I'm just going to click New Transform. It'll automatically use the previous dimensions. I'll grab this, I'll delete it. Now I'm going to add the screws to this shelf assembly and to the L bracket assembly. Now the reason why I want to do this is that I can make the instances. So something to double check is that all these instances are referencing the L bracket assembly. Because then if we go ahead and add the screws, into the assembly, it'll update on all the instances. So that's pretty cool. That way you don't need to add in the screws one by one because who has time for that? I'm going to need our smaller screw in here. I'm going to copy this guy, paste him in here, move him on over using Shift. The nice thing about using Quantize is that you can eyeball things and still get them exact, which is lovely. And you don't have to type in exact dimensions. So that's good. Now we need this to be in here as well. I'm gonna unsolo that. Look at all of our beautiful brackets. Now, as I'm looking at this, I'm thinking, wow, wouldn't this bracket be beautiful if we beveled it? So I'm going to go ahead and do that because this part is pretty much done. And we do beveling as a last step because it's hard to undo. I'm going to use UL to select here. And I'm going to use MS, the hotkey, for the bevel tool. I'm going to make the subdivisions about 2 because that's fine. I'm going to drag my mouse in order to create a nice round bevel. It doesn't need to be super large. This is probably good enough. We can see what that looks like once you add in that there. So that looks fine. Now, what you always do when you manufacture sheet metal so that no one cuts themselves as they're using a product, you always bevel the corners. And that also just looks nicer when something is 3D modeled realistically. It just gives it some extra life when someone considers those small things. So we're going to go ahead and click on these edges here. Or these points rather. So I'll need that point, this point, those 4 corners. We're going to use MS again, and we'll round this out. You can really round out this as much as you'd like. I'm going to add in one more subdivision just to make it look nice. And I'll turn this back on. That's looking pretty nice. So those are our sheet metal brackets. We have most of them done. We have these 2 on the back are cross brackets. I'm going to go ahead and here, click on one of these cross brackets and just solo it so we can focus on it here. I'm going to use ML for loop path cut. I'm going into edge mode. I'm going to add a loop here. I'm going to make it 1 inch from the end. Actually, that feels like too much. Let's make it 0.5. That feels much better. And that looks good to me. I'm going to go over here, create another one. So that is 0.5 away from the end as well. So now we have these 2 ends here. Now what I need to do is use inset. The hotkey for that is MW. In order to create a hole, and then we'll use fit circle. I'm going to transform this, new transform, same settings as before. Now you'll notice that even though I'm using fit to circle, it looks very square, and that's because it doesn't have enough points to look like anything else. And that's honestly fine, because the distance in which someone's going to look at this will be so far away that nobody's going to see that this is a square. They're just going to think, oh, that looks like a very nice circular hole. Because when you look at it from back here, you can't even tell. And once we do that, we can go ahead and delete the center. I can use MP for stitch and sew. But first I need to make sure that I have these loops selected with loop selection. So I selected that one, I selected this one, holding down Shift, MP, stitch and sew. Hold Shift while dragging, and then you'll make this lovely simplified hole right over here. And now we need to do that for the opposite end real quick. This one seems a little bit long for this. I mean, honestly, this is probably fine. I'm just going to copy it and paste it in here. Something that I'd like to add in is an L bracket right over here. At this point, I'm not sure if this is overbuilt or underbuilt in terms of its structural integrity, but if this were to be built in real life, you know, we could just test it and find out. But over here, I'm going to work on this back bracket. I'm never going to build this in real life, so I guess we won't really know, but that's okay. I'm going to solo this and use ML. And I'm just going to add in some loops here to make it easier to add in where additional holes will go. I'm holding shift so that I can use quantize to just snap these in. I'm going to use fit to circle, new transform, so that we just reuse our old settings. That works fine. New transform. Go in and selecting all of these, and then I'll delete them and we'll have some holes. Can turn back on this. I think that I want to download one more screw. I want a 1-inch screw. Wood screw. Phillips head. This will work. Download. So this is the new screw. You can see that it actually has these cutouts for particle board so that it can continue to, it just works better and cuts better through it, and also holds it in place better because it's particle board and it'll I think it'll expand a little bit and it'll just hold better. So I think that's interesting how they design these. I'm going to copy this. It'll work fine for this. I'll paste it in here. That would actually be something that would be interesting to look up, because that's just my hypothesis based on looking at the screw, but I don't really know for sure. So if anyone knows anything about that screw type and why it has those little cuts in there, you know, can let me know in the comments. That'd be interesting. Maybe sometime I'll look it up myself. Do we have any woodworkers in the crowd? I feel like a lot of creative people have multiple creative hobbies, so if you are a fellow woodworker, let me know. I haven't done woodworking in a little while. I did it more in college. Oh man, that's way too big of a screw. Oh, I was talking and I wasn't thinking about what I was doing. This needs to go down here. We're almost done. We're almost done here. Okay, so that's looking good. Now, if you remember, we'll need to round these corners. So let's go ahead and take care of that now. And now, time for bevels. And this is really the last step. So I'll briefly go over how to bevel, and then I'll speed it up quite a bit. So actually beveling this bracket will be very similar to beveling the last. So we're just taking all these points and rounding them so that no one cuts themselves on sheet metal. MS is the hotkey for the bevel tool, new transform. Good to go, we're done. Let's take a look at everything else, which is actually quite a bit. We have all of these wood parts. Now the cool thing about this is that if we have ones that are referencing an original because they're instances, if we update the reference object, it'll update them all. So let's go ahead and solo this. Now, beveling is pretty simple. If you are new to this, or even not new to this, it's actually good to save a copy before you start doing a lot of beveling, because it's very hard to undo. So go ahead and save yourself a copy. And now I'm just going to hold Shift and select all the edges I'd like to bevel. So what kinds of hobbies do you all have? I'm really curious, because creative people have really cool hobbies, and usually more than one of them. So if you have a creative hobby, leave it in the comments. Tell us what you like to do, just for fun, if anyone's out there and wants to share. Okay, I like doing embroidery. I've dabbled in woodworking because my father's a carpenter and he got me into it. We're missing an edge over here. Let's use MS to bevel this. I'm going to make this 0.1 and just see what that looks like. I'm going to reduce the subdivisions. I think 2 is pretty good. I have a gut feeling that I should do 0.1. And then once we do that, unsolo it, it'll update for all those parts. Let's take care of the upright. Now, this is going to be very repetitious, so I'll speed it up at this point. So at this point, everything has fillets pretty much here. This has been a fun project so far, 3D modeling the bookshelf and creating these sculpture hands. We still need to 3D model some more assets for the library. This is a good stopping point for today. Hopefully you'll stay tuned for the next steps in this process. If you hit like and subscribe and hit the bell, you'll be notified when the next episode comes out. If you'd like to support my YouTube channel, you can leave me a tip on Ko-fi if you find any of this helpful for learning. And thank you so much for 3D modeling with me here on Ambient 3D Animations. See you here next time.